what do I do when the woman who stole my hard work for 18 months laughs in my face, calling me a glorified trash collector? I do not get angry. I do not cry. I simply smile. I let her step onto that fake podium of success, and then I quietly pull the ladder out from underneath. This is a corporate blood sport, and I will win by building the perfect trap in absolute silence. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continuous love and support for our channel. Unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep uploading new videos here for the time being. Moving forward, we will be continuing our journey on Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon page, where you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories. These tales are longer, feature richer detail, and include dynamic multi-voice narration that we simply cannot share on YouTube. You can join us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description and pinned comment below. Now, let us begin today's story. My name is Skyla Brown, and this is how my reckoning began. The mahogany desk in Victoria Sterling's corner office did not just smell like imported wood polish. It smelled like 34 floors of absolute authority towering over downtown Chicago, outside the floor-to-ceiling glass. A bitter Lake Michigan wind rattled against the panes. But inside the headquarters of Meridian Apex Solutions, the air was warm, heavy, and engineered to make you feel very small. I was 34 years old, standing with my spine perfectly straight, feet planted firmly on the plush charcoal carpet. Between us lay a 200-page leather-bound dossier detailing every crisis I had quietly extinguished over the past 18 months. Every hostile media leak plugged, every catastrophic merger salvage operation, and every panicked midnight call from Fortune 500 executives that I had handled while Victoria took the credit. I had stepped into the shoes of the department head of strategy long ago, operating as the invisible backbone of this firm. Today, I was simply asking for the title, the public validation, and the compensation that matched the reality of my labor. Victoria did not open the binder. She did not even spare a glance at the gold-embossed cover where my name was printed. Instead, the CEO of Meridian Apex Solutions rested her manicured hands on the armrests of her Italian leather chair, tilted her head back, and laughed. It was not a soft, polite chuckle designed to soften a disappointment. It was a sharp, barking laugh that tore through the sterile silence of the suite, bouncing off the soundproof glass panels. It was genuine, unadulterated amusement, the kind of laughter a monarch might bestow upon a court beggar who had just asked for the crown. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany surface, interlocking her fingers. The diamond on her ring finger caught the gray twilight streaming through the window, throwing a cold glint across her face. "Skyla," Victoria said, her voice dropping into that smooth, lethal register she usually reserved for destroying competitors. "You are exceptional at cleaning up mess behind the scenes. Truly, you have a talent for diving into the filth and scrubbing until the floor shines. But you do not have the presence, you do not have the background, the charm, or the pedigree of a leader. You are a brilliant garbage collector. Darling, do not try to wear the suit of the person who stands at the podium." The silence that followed was suffocating. The air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. Normal person would have flinched. A normal person would have felt their cheeks burn with shame, or felt the sting of hot tears behind their eyes, or perhaps shouted in anger. I did neither. I stood there, watching her carefully. I watched the slight curve of her upper lip, the triumphant spark in her eyes, and the casual posture of a woman who believed her position in the world was divine right rather than borrowed competence. In that quiet, frozen moment, a profound clarity washed over me like ice water. There was no sadness. There was no heartbreak. There was only a crystal-clear realization. My talent, my intellect, and my tireless work ethic were not being groomed for advancement. They were being systematically harvested to construct the golden throne she sat upon. I was the engine, and she was the shiny hood ornament taking all the glory while I burned through my youth in the dark. Victoria took a slow sip from her porcelain cup. watching me over the rim, waiting for the crack in my composure. She wanted a scene. She wanted me to beg, to plead, or to throw a tantrum so she could security escort me out of the building and feel entirely justified in her disdain. I offered her no such luxury. I let out a slow, steady breath. I tilted my head slightly and bowed it in a gesture of calm, undisturbed compliance. "I understand. Victoria," I said, my voice as smooth and even as polished glass. I did not reach for my portfolio. I left the thick leather binder sitting on her desk, a monument to 18 months of stolen work. I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak door. I did not rush. I did not slam the door behind me. The click of the latch was whisper soft. Victoria thought she had just put an ambitious subordinate back in her place. She thought she had won another game of corporate dominance. What she did not realize, as I walked down the marble hallway under the soft fluorescent lights, was that she had just signed the death warrant for her own career. The game was over, and I was about to dismantle her world, brick by brick. The moment I sat back down at my workstation, my monitor lit up like a distress beacon on a sinking ship. 5 unread urgent messages blinked in rapid succession on the internal company communicator. They were all from senior department heads, people whose salaries tripled mine, yet who could not function without my ghost-written directives. The head of legal was in a state of absolute panic over a misaligned indemnity clause in a contract worth $40 million. A single wrong word could bankrupt a division. Right beneath that, the director of public relations was begging for a crisis management strategy to bury a leaked internal memo before the evening news cycle caught hold of it. This was my daily reality. I was the silent fixer, the one pulling the heavy steel levers in the dark while the executives took long, expensive lunches. I did not grow up with a silver spoon, nor did I have a legacy admission to an Ivy League university waiting for me. I was raised in a working-class neighborhood in the Midwest. In my world, rent was always late, and excuses paid for absolutely nothing. You either learned to anticipate the harsh realities of life, or you were crushed by them. Out there, you survived by seeing the punch coming before the fist was even raised. That raw survival instinct had evolved into a razor-sharp corporate weapon. I possessed a unique ability to read risk and analyze disaster scenarios with pure, unadulterated logic. While Victoria operated on impulsive vanity projects, throwing millions of company dollars at flashy but structurally hollow campaigns, I was the one who saw the foundational cracks. I was the one who stayed late in the empty building, quietly drafting the contingency plans. I was the heavy mortar holding her fragile, reckless empire together. A sudden shadow fell over my keyboard. Marcus, the senior data analyst, and the closest thing I had to a genuine ally in this corporate shark tank, leaned against the gray fabric of my cubicle wall. He glanced around the open floor nervously, making sure nobody was eavesdropping, before dropping his voice to a frantic, hushed whisper. "Skyla," Marcus breathed, his eyes darting toward the glass corner office I had just exited. "She is doing it again. The fourth quarter corporate restructuring plan. You spent 3 sleepless nights drafting? I just saw it on the secure printing queue." Victoria slapped her own name on the cover page and is taking it to the board of directors at noon. She is going to claim she spent her entire weekend strategizing and formulating the financial models. I looked up at Marcus. My face betrayed absolutely nothing, not a single twitch of a muscle, internally. However, the final, heaviest piece of the puzzle snapped into place with deafening clarity. It was a bitter metallic realization, but paradoxically, it was also profoundly liberating. My extreme competence was not a stepping stone toward a better life. It was a pair of heavy iron handcuffs. Victoria would never promote me. She simply could not afford to. If I moved up the ladder, she would lose her invisible shield. She needed me exactly where I was, buried deep in the administrative trenches, catching all the shrapnel and fixing the leaks while she paraded effortlessly on the surface. To her, I was just a utility, a machine meant to be run at maximum capacity until the gears finally ground to a halt. The corporations do not reward loyalty. They exploit efficiency. "Thank you, Marcus," I replied evenly, my tone devoid of any panic. "Do not worry about it. Go back to your desk and act naturally. He looked like he wanted to argue, to urge me to march into the boardroom and fight for my rightful credit. But something in the dead, cold focus of my eyes made him swallow his words, nod slowly, and walk away. I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors. I did not draft a furious email. I did not march into human resources to file a grievance that would inevitably be swept under the rug by Victoria's allies. Anger is a useless emotion in business. Calculation is what wins wars. I opened a hidden, encrypted server portal I had quietly built for myself over the past 12 months. My fingers began to fly across the mechanical keyboard, creating a rhythm of quiet, meticulous extraction. Over the next 2 hours, while the office buzzed with meaningless chatter, I downloaded exactly 3 years of Victoria's impulsive, disastrous directives. I archived every single email where she ordered legally dubious shortcuts. I saved the audio files of panicked voice messages where she demanded I fix her catastrophic blunders. More importantly, I compiled the raw financial data proving my direct interventions had saved the firm from catastrophic ruin, time and time again. Folder by folder, bite by bite, I gathered the unvarnished, undeniable truth of Meridian Apex Solutions. I was securing the entire chain of command's failures. I was not simply backing up data. I was forging an indestructible weapon, and the blade was finally sharp enough to cut through glass. The storm did not brew. It hit us like a Category 5 hurricane. It was a Tuesday morning when the screens across the trading floor flashed a violent, blinding red. Vanguard Dynamics, our most lucrative and intimidating client based in Austin, Texas, was plummeting in real time. They were a titan in cloud infrastructure, holding government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and someone, somewhere, had just leaked a rumor that their core servers had suffered a catastrophic structural breach. The media was practically foaming at the mouth, smelling a tech disaster that could define the decade. The board of directors at Meridian Apex convened in less than 15 minutes. The glass walls of the executive suite were frosted over for privacy, but you could feel the panic radiating through the floorboards. They needed a strategy, and they needed it before the stock market opened the next day. This was not a local scandal. This was global news. Victoria saw blood in the water, but not the kind that scares a shark. She saw an opportunity. She swept into the boardroom, flanked by her usual entourage of yes-men, and slammed her hands on the table. She loudly declared to the panicked executives that she would personally spearhead the Vanguard rescue operation. She promised to fly down to Austin, stand at the podium, and act as the definitive face of the defense strategy. She guaranteed a total media blackout and a full stock recovery within 48 hours. Of course, making a promise in a boardroom is easy. Fulfilling it requires actual intelligence. 10 minutes after the board meeting adjourned, I received a summons. Victoria's office was dim, the blinds pulled tight. She did not offer me a seat. She paced behind her mahogany desk. The earlier boardroom bravado entirely replaced by a frantic, predatory energy. "I need the Vanguard script by midnight," Victoria commanded, her voice stripped of any pleasantries. "I want a full crisis management protocol. I want a step-by-step media deflection strategy. And I need a speech that makes me sound like the absolute authority on decentralized network security." She stopped pacing and stepped closer to me, her perfume sickeningly sweet in the stagnant air. "And Skyla, let us be very clear. I expect perfection. People who are ungrateful, people who do not know how to play their designated roles, find it remarkably difficult to survive in this industry. A bad recommendation from me means you will not even get a job sorting mail in this city. Do you understand?" She was holding a match to my career, daring me to flinch. She expected resistance. She expected the bitter resentment of a woman who had just been denied a promotion the day before. Instead, I gave her exactly what she wanted. I looked her dead in the eye and nodded. "I understand perfectly. Victoria, you will have the script by midnight. It will be bulletproof." The sheer obedience threw her off balance for a split second, but her monumental ego quickly absorbed it as a victory. She waved her hand dismissively, sending me away. I walked back to my desk, my heart beating in a slow, rhythmic tempo. It was time to build the guillotine. For the next 8 hours, I crafted a masterpiece of corporate deception. On the surface, the crisis management plan I wrote for Victoria was a work of art. The speech was persuasive, authoritative, and laced with aggressive confidence. It provided a sweeping narrative that Vanguard Dynamics was a victim of a coordinated corporate espionage attempt, effectively shifting the blame away from their internal systems. But beneath the glossy rhetoric, I planted a bomb, a highly technical, invisible bomb. In the middle of the technical briefing section, I instructed Victoria to use a specific sequence of terminology. I had her claim that Vanguard's safety lay in their newly deployed heuristic encryption bypass protocol. To a board of directors with business degrees, it sounded incredibly sophisticated. To the press, it sounded reassuring. But to anyone who actually engineered cloud infrastructure, it was a glaring, mathematically impossible contradiction. A heuristic bypass does not protect a network. It creates a diagnostic backdoor. By claiming Vanguard used this to secure their data, Victoria would be publicly admitting to leaving the vault door wide open. It was a fatal flaw, a digital vulnerability that only the engineers and the most paranoid tech executives would recognize. It was a dog whistle for disaster. I polished the document, sent it to her inbox at exactly 11:45 at night, and packed up my things. But my real work was just beginning. I went back to my apartment, locked the door, and brewed a pot of black coffee. The city outside my window was completely dark. I booted up my personal, heavily modified laptop. I routed my connection through a secure virtual private network, bouncing my IP address through servers in 3 different countries to ensure total anonymity. I opened a blank document and began to write the truth. I compiled a devastatingly accurate, 70-page forensic risk analysis of the Vanguard crisis. I detailed exactly how the breach happened, why the current corporate structure was failing, and most importantly, I highlighted the exact network vulnerability that the media had not yet discovered. I laid out the raw, unvarnished facts that Meridian Apex was trying to cover up with Victoria's impending speech. I addressed the encrypted file to one man, Julian. Julian was the chairman of Vanguard Dynamics. He was a notoriously cold, brilliantly paranoid former engineer who built his empire from the ground up. He despised corporate doublespeak, and he trusted absolutely no one. At exactly 3:55 in the morning, I hit send. The anonymous email vanished into the digital ether, flying straight toward the servers in Austin. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my tired eyes. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee. The digital clock on my screen ticked over. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At exactly 4:12 in the morning, a tiny read receipt notification popped up on the corner of my screen. Encrypted file opened. Julian was awake. Julian was reading. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. The bait was taken. The trap was officially set. Victoria thought she was flying down to Texas to wear a crown. She had no idea she was walking straight onto a battlefield with a target painted directly on her back. The clock on the wall struck exactly 8 in the morning. The executive floor of Meridian Apex Solutions was a whirlwind of frantic energy. Assistants were sprinting down the halls with freshly pressed suits and steaming cups of coffee. In exactly 45 minutes, a black car was scheduled to take Victoria to a private hangar at O'Hare International Airport, where a chartered jet waited to fly her down to Austin. This was supposed to be her crowning moment. I walked down the glass hallway, my footsteps steady and unhurried. I was not carrying my usual tablet loaded with talking points, nor did I have my headset on to field emergency calls. I carried only a single, crisp white envelope. I did not bother knocking on the mahogany door. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Victoria was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, checking her reflection in a compact mirror and adjusting the collar of her designer blazer. She did not even turn around. "Put the final briefing binder on the desk, Skyla," she commanded, snapping the mirror shut. "And make sure my phone is routed through your terminal while I am in the air. I do not want any local press bothering me before the conference begins." I walked over to the massive wooden desk, but I did not set down a binder. I placed the thin white envelope right in the center of her leather blotter. The sound of the paper sliding against the smooth surface made her pause. Victoria finally turned around, an irritated frown creasing her forehead. She looked at the envelope, then up at me. "What is this?" she asked, her tone dripping with impatience. "That is my formal resignation," I replied, my voice completely level. "Effective immediately." For a moment, the words simply did not compute in her brain. She stared at me as if I had just spoken to her in a dead language. Then, she let out a short, dismissive scoff and reached for the envelope, tearing it open. Her eyes scanned the brief, legally binding paragraph. I watched the exact second. The reality hit her. The arrogant, predatory gleam in her eyes vanished, replaced by a sudden, hollow panic. The blood drained from her meticulously contoured face. Without me, she had no compass. She had a script full of technical jargon she did not understand, walking into a room full of vicious reporters, and the safety net she had relied on for the past 3 years was suddenly gone. "You cannot do this," Victoria stammered, her voice losing its polished edge. "You absolutely cannot do this today. Skyla, we are in the middle of a global crisis." "You are in the middle of a global crisis, Victoria," I corrected her calmly. "I am unemployed." Panic fully took over. The facade of the untouchable CEO crumbled into dust right before my eyes. She lunged forward, pressing her hands flat on the desk. "Listen to me," she said, her breathing growing shallow and erratic. "I will double your salary. Right now. I will have human resources draft the paperwork before I get on the plane. I will give you a 50% bonus and 10,000 shares of company stock. You want the department head title? It is yours. You are the vice president of strategy as of this exact second. Just get on that plane with me." It was pathetic. The woman who had laughed in my face just 24 hours ago, calling me a glorified garbage collector, was now practically begging on her hands and knees. It was a stark, beautiful confirmation of my own worth. I did not need her validation. I never had. I looked at her, my expression completely composed, my eyes cold and unyielding. "I cannot collect garbage forever, Victoria," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the office. "Especially when the foulest stench in this building is coming directly from the chair you are sitting in. Good luck in Austin." I turned my back on her and walked out. She called my name, her voice shrill and desperate, but I did not stop. I walked past the cubicles, past the bewildered executives, and straight out the front doors of the building. I stepped out onto the Chicago pavement. The morning sun was brilliantly bright, cutting through the crisp wind. I took a deep breath of the city air. For the first time in 3 years, my mind was entirely my own. Behind me, the glass tower was undoubtedly descending into absolute chaos, a massive ship that had just lost its only true navigation system. But that was no longer my problem. I raised my hand and hailed a passing yellow taxi. As I slid into the leather back seat, my phone began to vibrate in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID displayed an unknown number with a Texas area code. I answered the call. "Miss Brown." A deep, profoundly calm voice spoke on the other end of the line. "This is Julian from Vanguard Dynamics. I read your risk analysis at 4 o'clock this morning. It was the most brilliantly ruthless piece of corporate strategy I have ever seen." I smiled, watching the Chicago skyline roll by through the taxi window. "Thank you, Julian." "Do not thank me yet," he continued, his tone shifting into absolute authority. "I have a private jet waiting for you at the executive terminal of Midway Airport. The pilots are ready for departure. Get on that plane, fly to Austin, and come see me. I have an offer for you, and I promise you, it is the most powerful position you have ever been offered." The main auditorium at the Austin Convention Center was a gladiator arena disguised as a corporate press room. Dozens of high-definition television cameras formed a solid steel wall at the back of the hall. The blinding glare of flashbulbs snapped in a chaotic, unrelenting rhythm, illuminating the faces of over 200 financial reporters, tech analysts, and hostile investors. Above the main stage, a massive digital ticker continuously scrolled the real-time stock prices. casting a harsh, artificial glow over the entire room. I stood quietly in the shadowed wings just off the main stage, standing right beside Julian. The chairman of Vanguard Dynamics was a tall, imposing man with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. We watched the monitor in silence as Victoria stepped up to the main podium. She looked exactly like a woman who believed she had already won the war. Her designer suit was immaculate. Her posture radiated a manufactured, arrogant confidence. She gripped the edges of the podium and offered a practiced, reassuring smile to the sea of hungry journalists. For the first 5 minutes, she was flawless. She read the script I had written for her with aggressive conviction, delivering a sweeping emotional narrative about corporate resilience and unwavering security. Vanguard Dynamics remains an impenetrable fortress, Victoria declared, her voice projecting smoothly through the sound system. We have isolated the anomalies. Furthermore, I can personally assure our shareholders that our network relies on a newly deployed heuristic encryption bypass protocol, ensuring total protection across all decentralized nodes. She paused, lifting her chin to let the impressive-sounding jargon wash over the room. It sounded incredibly sophisticated. It sounded absolute. But it was the digital equivalent of handing a burglar the blueprint to a bank vault. In the third row, a woman stood up. She was a senior investigative tech journalist for a major financial network, and just an hour prior, Julian had personally directed his private team to hand her a highly specific, anonymous tip. She did not wait for a microphone. Her voice cut through the auditorium like a serrated blade. "Miss Sterling," the journalist projected, holding up a digital tablet. "You just stated that Vanguard relies on a heuristic encryption bypass protocol. However, standard cybersecurity architecture dictates that a heuristic bypass is inherently diagnostic. It does not encrypt. It actively disables firewalls to allow internal traffic routing. Are you publicly admitting on live television that Vanguard's core server defenses have been intentionally left open?" The silence that crashed down over the room was sudden and absolute. The constant hum of whispers died instantly. Every single camera zoomed in tightly on Victoria's face. From my spot in the shadows, I watched the exact moment her brain short-circuited. Victoria froze completely. Her perfectly rehearsed smile vanished, replaced by the wide-eyed, terrifying realization that she had just stepped onto a landmine she could not even see. She looked down at the script, frantically scanning the paper for an answer, but there was nothing there. I had not written a defense for the vulnerability because the vulnerability was indefensible. "Well," Victoria stammered, the microphone picking up the sudden, dry rasp in her throat. "The protocol in question is highly robust. We are utilizing synergy across our digital infrastructure to ensure that all data remains secure under our corporate oversight umbrella." It was word salad. It was meaningless, hollow corporate jargon, and every single person in that room knew it. The journalists began shouting over each other, a chaotic wave of hostile follow-up questions. "Are your servers compromised right now? Did Meridian Apex authorize this security gap? How much data has been exposed?" Victoria began to sweat. Real, heavy drops of perspiration ruined her immaculate makeup. Her hands trembled on the podium. She leaned into the microphone, her voice rising in a desperate, shrill panic. "I assure you, we are leveraging key performance indicators to manage the infrastructure," she babbled, digging her own grave deeper with every syllable. "We are maintaining a dynamic posture against all threats." Above her head, the giant electronic stock ticker reacted to her incompetence in real time. The numbers flickered, turned a violent shade of red, and began to drop. Vanguard Dynamics was plummeting by 5%, then 7%, wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization, with every terrified stutter that left her mouth. The room was descending into total chaos. The brand was dying on live television, and Victoria was the executioner holding the axe. Julian turned to me, his expression entirely unreadable. "It is time," he said softly. The heavy oak double doors leading directly onto the stage swung open with a resounding thud. The sudden movement caught the attention of the front row. and a ripple of silence quickly spread backward through the screaming crowd. Julian stepped out into the harsh stage lights. The reporters immediately lowered their notepads. When the chairman of Vanguard Dynamics appeared in person, you listened. He walked past a hyperventilating Victoria without so much as glancing at her, stepping up to a secondary microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian announced, his deep voice slicing through the remaining murmurs. Clearly, the external consultancy firm we hired lacks the technical literacy required to speak on behalf of this company. Therefore, Vanguard Dynamics is taking immediate internal control of this situation. I would like to introduce the person who will be handling this crisis and all future risk management for our enterprise. Please welcome our new Vice President of Risk Management, Miss Skyla Brown. I walked out from the shadows. I did not rush. My strides were measured, calm, and radiating absolute authority. I ignored the blinding flashes of the cameras. I walked straight past Victoria, who was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror, as if she were looking at a ghost holding a loaded weapon. I did not smile at her. I simply stepped up to the main podium, gently moving her aside. I gripped the microphone. I looked directly into the center camera, broadcasting to millions of viewers, and I began to speak. For exactly 3 minutes, I commanded the room. I did not use meaningless buzzwords. I deployed precise, undeniable facts. I cited the exact server loads, detailed the localized quarantine measures already initiated at 4 o'clock this morning, and provided the verifiable cryptographic hashes proving that zero client data had left the internal network. I explained that the so-called heuristic bypass was a legacy term mistakenly referenced by the former consultants, and I outlined the actual multi-layered, zero-trust architecture Vanguard was actively running. I spoke with the cold, hard logic of a woman who actually knew how the machine worked. The tension in the auditorium evaporated. The hostile shouting ceased, replaced by the frantic scribbling of reporters finally getting real, usable facts. Above my head, the flashing red numbers on the stock ticker slowed, stabilized, and slowly began to climb back into the green. In just 3 minutes, I patched the fatal wound, I extinguished the fire, and right beside me, standing entirely forgotten under the harsh stage lights, Victoria looked like exactly what she was, an incompetent, powerless clown who had just been publicly stripped of her kingdom. The throne was no longer hers. It belonged to the architect who built it. The fallout was not just swift, it was absolute. Before the stage lights in the Austin auditorium had even been powered down, Julian demanded a pen, right there in the green room. He signed the immediate termination papers for Vanguard Dynamics' contract with Meridian Apex Solutions, a deal worth tens of millions of dollars. He did not stop there. Julian released a scathing public statement to the very financial networks that were broadcasting the disaster, explicitly citing the gross negligence, outright deception, and the undeniable incompetence of their chief executive officer. Back in Chicago, the shockwave hit with catastrophic force. The board of directors at Meridian Apex convened a frantic emergency meeting precisely at midnight. They were already in a state of sheer panic over losing their flagship client, but their panic mutated into absolute fury when a massive, anonymous digital package landed in every single one of their encrypted inboxes simultaneously. It was the archive I had meticulously compiled. They were forced to sit in their leather chairs and review 3 years of Victoria's reckless directives, legally questionable shortcuts, and documented proof that she was a massive corporate liability who only survived because I was doing her job in the shadows. The board's vote was unanimous and immediate. They fired her for cause, stripping her of her chief executive officer title, voiding her stock options, and legally revoking every single penny of her golden parachute. She was cast out into the cold, entirely empty-handed. It was 2 a.m. when my new company phone vibrated on the polished glass surface of my desk. The caller ID flashed a Chicago area code I knew all too well. I let it ring twice before I picked it up. Victoria was on the other end, and the polished, terrifying veneer of the untouchable executive was completely gone. I could hear the clinking of ice against a glass echoing in the background. She was drunk, broken, and raging. You treacherous snake! Victoria screamed into the receiver, her voice raw, slurred, and dripping with venom. You set me up. You used your dirty little tricks to steal my career. You destroyed everything I built. You are nothing but a thief. I sat back in my chair, listening to her fall apart. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no pity. I felt only a profound, quiet satisfaction settling deep into my bones. I did not ruin you, Victoria, I replied calmly, my voice smooth, but carrying the heavy, lethal weight of absolute victory. I simply stopped protecting you from your own incompetence. You built a house of cards, and I just stepped out of the way when the wind blew. The next time someone asks to be a department head, do not laugh in their face. Enjoy your early retirement. I pressed the button to end the call, instantly cutting off her hysterical sobbing. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, located on the top floor of the Vanguard Dynamics Tower. Austin stretched out endlessly below me, a vast grid of brilliant city lights pulsing with life and industry. I looked down at the sprawling empire, an undeniable truth, solidifying in the quiet, air-conditioned space, in the brutal, unforgiving arena of corporate America. Real power does not reside in a fancy title, a designer suit, or an arrogant smile. True power belongs to the person who quietly holds the keys to the machine, the one who dictates the life and death of the entire game. Thank you all so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from right now? Please let me know down in the comments. As a quick reminder, because YouTube has disabled our monetization, we will not be uploading any new videos on this platform for the foreseeable future. We are moving our operations over to Patreon. If you found today's story satisfying and want to hear more, please help us keep this community alive by joining our Patreon. You will get access to our absolute best, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your incredible support, and we will see you there.